Edward was a barred rock chick that I got a little over a year ago. He was curious and crazy, but he sure learned a lot and grew up to be a great rooster. He protected his flock like none other. So this channel is a nod to Edward. Edward, wherever you are, I hope that my curiosity could help me learn as much as you learned to be a great rooster.
Hello. There I am again. Okay. Let's tilt the camera down a little bit. Okay. Can you see me now? Are you ready for Ready Player One? I want to say, first of all, this is not a book or a movie that I would have just chosen to watch or read. Hydrate. The only reason that I actually ended up watching, I read the book first, Strange Story. My son, when he was about 17 or 18, had a little girlfriend, but that's okay. He took the girl out for a movie, and they went and saw the movie Ready Player One. And he said he really liked it. He also said, I think you would really like it, Mom. You would love it. Because he knew that I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. And so he didn't really elaborate on that, but whatever. Fast forward a couple years, and I'm working night shift at his job that's just boring me out of my mind. I'm not the type of person to try to hide someplace in the job and fall asleep. So I pulled up the computer. I'm not going to go on TikTok on my phone or something like that. I didn't even bring a cell phone to work. So to make sure that I was still alert and still technically working, I pulled up on my computer the free novel read website. That's actually how I found it. And one of the first books that I saw was Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. I was a little surprised. I'm going to adjust my leg here. Sorry, guys. I was a little surprised because I didn't even realize that a book was written. I thought it was just one of those little Gen X or Gen Z millennial movies that came out. So I was a little curious because my son had said he thought I'd like it. I start reading this book, and I have to admit, I mean, it really captured my attention. And I thought it was really well put together. Then I thought about the content that I read, right? I'm sorry I'm adjusting so much. I'm just sitting on my bed today. So I'm not sitting in an actual chair. So it's a little weird to get comfortable here. But I finally saw the movie afterwards on YouTube, and I paid the $2.99 to rent it and everything. And it was very different. There was a lot of differences, but kind of the same flow, the same ideas and the same flow, but all the details were very different. And that's to be expected. But I gotta say, I liked the movie too. Like, you know how sometimes you read a book and then you watch the movie and you're like, the movie sucked because it doesn't do justice for the book. Well, I think for both Ready Player One's book and movie, both were great. I can't fit, I'm 50-50. I can't say which one I liked better than the other. It was that interesting because both of them kept the concept of the 80s and the 90s. And that's really what the movie and the book was about, is just a guy who had created a world for the post millennials, like whoever's after the millennials. This is supposed to be in the future. And, you know, the guy dies, and because of his love and fascination for the 80s and 90s when he was young, all these kids in the future are playing like, you know, Oingo Boingo and Michael Jackson, and they're so into the 80s pop culture that it's fun to read. It's fun to read and fun to watch. So let me talk about kind of what the book side says, and then I'm going to show you the preview. I'm going to go in the order that I went in. So in the book, this is in the future where virtual reality glasses is not just the only tool for virtual reality. In fact, virtual reality has become a world of its own called the Oasis. Okay, This guy created the Oasis, which is a virtual reality worlds. So it's a universe. Every world is something different. There's school world called Ludus, which is important in the book, but not mentioned in the movie. Maybe once it's mentioned. All kids by this time in the future have to have a login virtual tool to get into Oasis and go to school on the planet called Ludus. They graduate high school and then maybe find jobs out in the world, or they're mostly gamers. So there's worlds where you can go and fight and battle and do things that, you can create your own character. The big thing is nobody knows your real identity when you're in Oasis. Everybody has an avatar, right? And an avatars all have names that nobody knows, even the kids on Ludus. The main character of this movie, his avatar's name is Parzival. Of course, as we all know, if you've ever had to make an avatar name in the internet, you can't ever really pick one that's spelled the correct way because someone else has already picked it. So the character Parzival, his real name is Wade. Is Wade Webb, I think it is. Sorry, I didn't write it down. But he's the main character. He starts introducing himself in the book as the character that he just like, I didn't think I would be the first one to win this key. And you're like, what's going on? So the guy that created Oasis, the guy that was fascinated with 80s pop culture, his name was James Halliday. His avatar was called Anorak. Some guy dressed as a wizard, right? Anorak, James Halliday, pretty much in the book, they talk about how when he died, he had already died years ago, right? This guy died and made this elaborate like video and shared it to the world. And it was very dramatic. It was him looking at his own body in the coffin, and then he turns into Anorak, his avatar, and starts to propose to the world that since he is I think he's like, he had no heir, he died 67-year-old as a bachelor, he had no living relatives, and by most accounts no friends. Now when he was growing up through college, he did have a friend named Ogden Morrow. Now Ogden was not as tech savvy as James Halliday, but he did have his own avatar called Og. The guy was more outgoing, more eloquent with his words. So this partnership forms while they're in college, and they start to create the Oasis. Now, James Halliday is kind of the brains behind the operation. Ogden Morrow is kind of the PR guy, right? He helps launch it amongst the world. And in doing so, it's a system that requires all players to have a virtual reality glasses and gloves. Now, if you get really Gucci and you really want to immerse yourself into this virtual reality world, you can also get the suit, which allows you to feel certain things, not to an extent where it harms you, but you can almost do full immersion, which the movie does kind of elaborate that too. When you see people, I think there's a scene in the movie where this mom's standing on the couch fighting battles, and her kid's like, "Mom, dinner's on fire," and she doesn't even notice because she's got the goggles on. That's the only devil to the virtual reality concept that I would never participate in. No thanks. So moving on, when James Halliday proposes that in order for somebody to inherit his Oasis and his cajillion bajillion dollars of worth of this Oasis, they would have to solve the riddle with 3 keys. It gets very elaborate. And I don't know if you guys are savvy with games, but there's some games have an Easter egg. Okay. They literally have to find the Easter egg of Oasis. And whoever finds the Easter egg inherits Oasis. So it becomes a big thing. But in the book, by the time you start reading the first chapter, it elaborates, not elaborate. Parzival explains that Years had gone by and nobody was able to solve the riddles, not even the first key. There's three, right? Um, this kid, I want to find the name. I should share my screen so you can see this, but I don't want to bore you with all the scrolling. But this kid, his name is Wade, and Wade establishes his character. It's in the first person, it's written in first person as him talking to the reader. And he is a student in school, and he's basically on his very last year. He's a senior. He's this close to graduating. He describes his life. I mean, life in the world is some kid living in Columbus, Ohio. Life in the world then, in the future, is basically drab. I mean, there's a huge economic collapse. People don't live in their own homes in rural areas anymore. In order to survive, a lot of people move into the big cities. And it sounds like in order to accommodate the population, what cities started to do were build big racks throughout the city. Cars are no longer in use. They're piled in this huge wall around the city. And they just stack trailers on these racks. And that's what people live in. It's like the slums of the slums, right? This kid, Percival, he has a secret place that he goes to, and it's basically the back of a minivan at the bottom of a car pile where he is rigged. He's supposed to be very tech savvy, very smart at rebuilding. He finds old laptops, rebuilds them, and then he can watch stuff on it. And part of the quest to solve the Easter egg or find the Easter egg in Oasis is to really immerse yourself in 80s pop culture, which includes watching all the movies, The Breakfast Club, Say Anything, 16 Candles, knowing all the songs, knowing all the games, things that came out in the 80s like Dungeons and Dragons, Atari, old games like Joist, yeah. And just Pac-Man, everything like that. I mean, it movies, music, and games. And this kid uses his smart technology to basically rebuild laptops, watch movies, listen to music, play these games so that he can try to solve this riddle for the Easter egg. Everybody is, right? Some people take the immersion more seriously than others. Some don't. And it becomes a thing, right? Parzival also talks about his living situation, which is he hates it. He's an orphan. His mother and father had passed away. I guess drug problem is a continuous thing in the future. So his mother passed away from an overdose, and something about his father had died in an accident when he was a baby. Blah blah blah. He is currently living with his aunt, and I guess she's kind of not stable. She has a boyfriend that just kind of is a douche. And the kid basically lives in the laundry room. He describes his sleeping area on the floor next to the washer and dryer. Now, when you watch the movie, you see him at one point laying on top of the washer and dryer, but that's all they really say about it. They don't really say anything else. But in the book, he describes his aunt taking him in only for the food stamps, and that's about it. So he has a good friend. I want to say he has two positives in his life. One is his best friend, a guy named H, which is a very interesting character. H is your basic best friend that, if they don't give you a load of shit, then they're not your friend. He and H are, close best friends, but H is a little more well off. H is a lot more independent. H doesn't have like the family issues that Parzival does. H doesn't establish himself as stationary like Parzival does. Like H seems to be on the move. That's all you kind of get the feel for, right? But H is also a more elite gamer than Parzival, because H has built up enough credits to where he can, in the virtual world of Oasis, you can establish like your own place, not your own planet. Maybe if you were rich enough. I'm getting little messages from Sheila. Hi, Sheila. I love you, sis. I hope the selling goes well. I'm talking about a movie slash book called Ready Player One, and I'm rambling on. So let me get back to what I was trying to finish this thought. Parzival has a best friend named H. It's this big guy that gives him a hard time and a rash about Artemis. Now, Artemis is another character that Parzival doesn't know her directly. He just knows it's a female character that writes a lot of blogs, and the character only shows her avatar picture. And Parzival's like infatuated with her. He reads all her blogs. He admires her know-how and her knowledge about 80s pop culture, and he just oodles over her. And H is always giving him a hard time, saying things like, "For all you know, it's some old man in his basement with barbecue sauce on his shirt named Chuck." And in the movie, they only refer to that once. H only says that once, but in the book, he says it all the time. Now, there's always going to be a monkey wrench in some of these stories. And in this one, it's going to be a character named IROC. Before I got distracted, what I was trying to say is H had established his own hangout place. Now, you have to have played at a certain level to be able to afford a place like this. And in order for other friends to be a part and be able to enter into this virtual place, they have to have a special invite from the creator, which is H. So H has a place called the basement where he can virtually sit and hang out with his friend Parzival or whoever else is invited, and they play games. And this is where it comes into play as to how Parzival accomplishes the keys later on in the book. Because all these old school games that they play together, they compete against each other. And that's kind of the point, I think, that James Halliday set it up for. So now we know that Parzival is the main character. James Halliday, or Anorak, is the creator of the Oasis, died and has left the inheritance to somebody to earn by obtaining the Easter egg in Oasis. He has a best friend named Ogden Morrow who helped him create Oasis, but sold it mainly. Now, one footnote. Growing older, according to history in the book, James Halliday and Ogden Morrow loved to play Dungeons and Dragons when they were in college. Apparently, during that time, they met a lady who they were both very impressed with because she was into Dungeons and Dragons. Now, if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, you knew that most of the time Dungeons and Dragons were just kind of the thing that nerdy boys played. Not a lot of girls played it. Apparently, in the book, she was one of those girls who really got into it. And I don't know if you see it coming, but both guys fell in love with her. But since James Halliday was too nerdy and a little too unconfident, he never said anything. So Ogden Morrow ended up asking her out. And in asking her out, eventually fell in love and married her. In the book, they do elaborate right out of the gates that they had fallen in love, gotten married, and she passed away years before they were ready to lose her. So there's a touch of sadness to that, where Ogden Morrow, James Halliday's best friend, had a wife and lost her. But it leaves it open-ended as to how James Halliday felt about her. He loved her too. So going into Parzival's character and these three keys. Now, there was a riddle in the video that James Halliday left. How much time am I at? I'm at about 20 minutes. Okay, I'm going to spend 10 more minutes elaborating on the game in Oasis and the Easter egg, and then maybe touch on how Parzival found the first key. And then I'll show you guys the little video of the preview to Ready Player One. So in the book, when James Halliday passed away, he puts out this video to, I guess, propose the challenge to obtain the Easter egg. And in it, he gives a riddle, right? In the riddle, it says 3 hidden keys open 3 secret gates, wherein the errant will be tested for worthy traits. And those with the skill to survive these straits will reach the end where the prize awaits. And then as he finishes, there's 3 keys that appeared, a copper key, a jade key, and a crystal key. They're all described elaborately. And then the copper key is the first one that should open the first gate, and so on. And so he also puts out what's called Anorak's Almanac. It's everything that James Halliday had in his brain put into kind of a book that is made public on the Oasis for anybody to read. It's basically their study guide to win this Easter egg, right? So another key point that I wanted to point out is that Percival explains that when these kids in the future are going to school on the planet Ludus in the Oasis, they are required to enroll with their real name and real mailing address, their avatar name, and their social security number or something like that. But when they're in school, they're not allowed to use their avatar name. So he's not allowed to be Parzival in school. So there's a little separation and a little secret identity, which he elaborates with his best friend H, that he is a student on Ludus and that he knows that H might be a student at Ludus, but might not be there anymore. So it's interesting. I guess the planet of Ludus has like 1,000 schools all over the planet. So at any given time, anybody you meet in Oasis could be kids age 5 to 18 that also attend school during the day. So there's a lot of weird regulations to that. That comes into key later on because hiding your identity in this book and the movie is a very important thing. You don't want anybody to know your real identity. That's common sense, right? With the internet, it's kind of a thing in the book. So moving on to that, let me get to my notes because I try to put notes. I started learning how to just keep myself on the path. So the riddle and Anorak's Almanac is where everybody started. The problem is in the book, they start talking about how everybody got all fired up about finding this Easter egg and they tried. And then 1 year passed, then 2 years, then 5, and everybody sort of just tapered off. Everybody was still trying to find the first key, but nobody really could. So this kid Parzival, he also talks about the different kinds of people and culture. One thing I forgot to elaborate, and I hate to throw this into like another 20 minutes, but there's different groups of people in Oasis. There are people that work independently looking for the Easter eggs, and there are people that work in groups, kind of like a guild, looking for the Easter egg. And then there is a corporation called IOI. If you see the movie, they look like total totalitarianism groups. You know, everybody's wearing uniforms. Apparently in Oasis, you can totally tell because all their avatars look exactly the same. And it's an interesting concept. It's basically a corporation that wants to inherit Oasis so that they can regulate it and even sort of like tax it on people, like charge people a fee in order to be in Oasis. And there's this hatred toward them. I think they're called I'm sorry, the groups that are not part of IOI are called something like eggers or something like that. Somebody help me out. What are they called? Gunters. Egg hunters. They're called gunters. Now, gunters come in either groups working together or individuals working solo. And that's important because to some people, working in a group is kind of like the cheap way out. There's this whole culture of how to do this correctly in Oasis. And this Parzival considers himself a solo gunter. But regardless, all gunters, groups or individuals, hate everybody from IOI, because anybody that sells themselves out to work for the corporation and then let the corporation control Oasis is just, like I said, the feeling is it's totalitarianism, and they hate that. So there's this race to get the keys between gunters, whether it's groups or individuals, or IOI, the corporation. So this kid Parzival starts talking about how he sort of just stumbled across the first key. He was the one that found the first copper key. And in doing that, he was talking about his extensive research through Anorak's Almanac, the one that James Halliday wrote. And he noticed that there was some kind of code in some of it. And he ended up pulling this code, and he found a riddle hidden within the writing. And it was talking about the copper key that waits for an explorer in a tomb filled with horrors, right? For all of you that play Dungeons and Dragons, you probably know where this is going. But you have much to learn if you hope to earn a place among the high scorers, right? So in Dungeons and Dragons, I'm not going to get into it because I never really got into it when I was young anyway. But there's maps, there's pamphlets, it's a lot of studying and riddles and things like that. And one of them is the Tomb of Horrors. Okay, I never even heard of it until I read this book. I'm not going to lie. I was never into Dungeons and Dragons. Sorry, but this kid was talking about how he's sitting in Latin class, right? And his teacher is talking about the Latin word to learn, and how that much to learn is part of the riddle that he discovered through the almanac. And who is it that has to learn? Students. Well, if students have much to learn, maybe the first key is on a planet where learning, maybe James Halliday wanted a student to find it. And he kind of pulls it all together, a planet filled with students, all of whom had much to learn. And then he just starts kind of remembering that ludus was also a Latin word for school, right? So he's going through Latin class, and this is just sort of coming to him. But I guess besides school, it could also mean sport or game, right? So it hits him. In the original D&D module, he says here, the entrance of the Tomb of Horrors was hidden near a low, flat-topped hill about 200 yards wide and 300 yards long, right? So he's thinking about the description of this place. And then he realizes that the planet he's on for school is filled with hills and filled with flat plateaus and areas all over this planet, and trees and open areas that could possibly hold the key, the entrance to where he could get the first key, right? So he just like totally just loses his mind in the middle of class, but he's got to maintain because he can't just leave class virtually. And in this Dungeons and Dragons module, I guess the area that he finds the key in is supposed to resemble a skull. So what he does is he kind of goes into the virtual maps while he's in school and looks at the area around the planet where he's at, and then realizes he finds the area. You can actually see it from almost like a Google Maps view. About loses his mind. He like is in the middle of class, about loses his mind. So he wants to go tell his best friend H this, right? And he then, I think later on, goes into the basement where H's private area is and starts talking to H. And this is where H is like, you want to play this? Challenges him. And then comes in another key character. And I just want to talk about this key character before I kind of end this part. There's another character named Irock. In the movie, you hardly even see Irock until about near the middle of the movie, toward the end. And then the whole time you're like, who is this guy? Like, where'd he come from? Why is he here? And he's he's funny, but you're like, why is he funny? Well, he's funny because what the book elaborates on is that, first of all, IROC is like some 13-year-old douchebag kid that tries to act like he knows everything and tries, just basically what 13-year-old kids sometimes do. So he actually has access into the basement where Parzival and H hang out, and Parzival's giving H a hard time, like, "Why did you invite this guy in here?" And H is like, "Yeah, he's a gunter. It maybe is something we could learn from him, whatever." And IROC turns out he just knows like kind of the surface of information. He doesn't know everything. He just sort of maybe might know a few things. And there's this little interaction between IROC and Parzival because Parzival doesn't hide the fact that he doesn't like IROC. And Parzival says something about, all right, then in 1987 in this movie or whatever, and they kind of do this little challenge, and H is just kind of watching, and Parzival actually calls him out, and IROC gets a little pissy and ends up peacing out. He's like, screw you guys. So he's trying to fit in, but he's not, and he knows that they don't like him, but he just kind of, I don't know. There's tension there, right? That becomes an issue later on. And we'll find out why, because it affects the hidden identity of Wade or Parzival. You got to remember, if this kid is 13 years old, he's also a student at Ludus, right? So I'm at 31 minutes and 30 seconds. I don't want to. Oh, hey, Faith is here. Hi, Faith. Love you. I love you guys too. You guys are great. Thanks for listening to me ramble on. But I just basically touched in on just the start of Ready Player One. Oh, Faith, you would have a heyday with that movie if you saw it. Everything you see on there would just be like, no, no. Kids in the virtual reality world, and everybody, oh, it's nuts. So the one thing I didn't do is touch on the movie very much, and I will play this, but I was about to play it and I forgot that I hadn't even shared the screen with you guys, so you can't see what I'm talking about. So let me share this screen real quick. Sorry. And I'll show you the actual preview for Ready Player One. There it is, the crazy tunnel screen. And so this is Ready Player One. Let me turn on the volume. There's the racks and the trailers of life or whatever that I was talking about. This is supposedly the world in the United States now, Columbus, Ohio. Can you imagine if life was like that? There's the washer and dryer. Sorry, I keep pausing. Go on, Faith. Okay, that was fun. I am not going to lie. I love the 80s and 90s music. So I saw some black and white footage from London and it looks like paradise back in the day when women didn't have rights. Oh, Sheila. Oh, I love you. Um, but you know what? You do have a point, Sheila, because I have home video that my husband's family saved from the 60s when they first went to California to visit one of these oceanside castles and Disneyland. And now, let me tell you, when you go to Disneyland now, you have people straight up walking around in a sports bra and pajama pants. It's so unclassy. But in this home video, you see people walking around Disneyland in uh, high heels and a beautiful dress. The women's hair is neatly made. Men are in ties and a hat. They're very well dressed. It's just a classy time. Um, let's see. It's well, it's how this is how they want us living. Yeah, that's the interesting thing about the movie, Faith. I thought about you guys when I was watching it. I was like, wow, these people live immersed, which is interesting because at the end they do say something about it. But I'll talk about that when I finish going through it. So between talking about The Shining and talking about this, watching that video, there's so many things I wanted to like touch on, but like I said, I'm at 36 minutes and I don't want to drag this on forever. So I ruined Rick's movie night with this talking about all the things wrong with his health. Faith. Now, don't worry, I do it too. I'm the one that watches movies, and if it's a movie about the military, I'm like, the hat's on wrong. She's not allowed to have her hair like that. The boots are not tucked right. And my husband's like, will you shut up? But I'm going to end and I'm going to find more information about Ready Player One and continue on to the next chapter. Or I might do another video about The Shining and its next chapter. The Shining has a lot of moving parts because it's a movie, a TV series, and a book, of which I haven't even like finished watching. I haven't even watched the TV series. I still have to finish talking about Cell, which I haven't finished reading. So there's going to be more videos. We'll hang out. But thanks you guys for coming by and saying hi and listening to me ramble on about Ready Player One. So apparently, oh yeah, apparently when I opened up the free reading website, there's a Ready Player Two. So I think I'm going to read that. It's by the same author. So I don't know what's going on there, but maybe there's going to be another movie. Who knows? With all that great music that they played, I love that the music that they played on the preview. I hope they do make another movie because it was fun. So, all right, love you, Sheila. Love you, Faith. Anybody else that stopped by to watch this later on? Guess I love you too. Later, guys.